What about it, Cecil? Ever been to Abilene?
No, I've been to Amarillo.
Same thing, right?
They're similar. They're all similar out there.
Yeah, here on I-20, it all looks the same. Unfortunately, Cecil,
Man,
it doesn't. The view doesn't change a whole lot.
It doesn't. It doesn't. It's unique for the first time, for an hour or so, and then you're like, man.
It's like a treadmill of boredom.
It definitely
really
is. You get a little wind, though.
Yeah. You just try to get to the next town like Abilene. Yeah, it's been an interesting weekend to say the least. As we put a wrap on Alabama men's basketball for the 2017-2018 season, Cecil, I asked the question on the Twitter account today whether or not this team underachieved, overachieved, or maybe finished about where expectations were for Avery Johnson's third squad. So I'll ask you that question. And I know you wrote about this over the weekend in review of this season, but ultimately where this team landed, where would you put it?
Well, the simplest way, and it's an oversimplification, but the first AP poll, they were 26. They missed the top 25. They were the next team out. And they finished in that 17 to 32 range. That's where they finished. So that's whether you call that meeting expectations. It's not meeting fan expectations because fans have higher expectations for their team, and they should. They would have liked to have seen one more round. Probably would have liked to have seen the bracket be a little different and have a Maryland-Baltimore County knock out that one seed for them, but it didn't happen. Played an outstanding Villanova team, a team that I think's got a real chance to get to San Antonio, probably by way of Abilene. But I think that they'll have a pretty good chance to be there. Just veteran, know how to play. Really, if you weren't a fan of the team that was getting beat by 25, they were a joy to watch the way they play basketball, and have been for 3 years. So would like to probably have had a closer game, more exciting game on Saturday, but I think that it ended up, after all the roller coaster ride, after all the people tweeting me on January the 17th that they were in the NIT, it ended up about where the expectation would have been.
It was a run in the postseason, Cecil, in which they won 3 games, won 2 in the SEC tournament, obviously dropped 2, 1 in the SEC tournament, 1 in the NCAA tournament, had to win over Virginia Tech in the big dance. Given the way that they were playing at the end of the year, could you have foreseen that coming? Or maybe was it a case that we didn't give as much credit to the teams Alabama was playing down the stretch? Pretty good clubs that they faced in that stretch, too.
Well, absolutely. One of them that Alabama split with is sitting in the Sweet 16. Another one that beat Alabama twice, Kentucky, with a good chance to get to the Final Four. Played Auburn on the road, which was probably the last. I'm going to be frank about it. That was probably the last good half of basketball Auburn played this year. Was against Alabama in Auburn in that game. Had injuries. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying they were. I think that was their last hurrah for the season. So again, didn't compete well against Florida as well as you'd like them to. Lost a home game to Arkansas. The home games were much more problematic for me in that stretch than the road games. But then they turned it around, played well on the neutral in St. Louis and in Pittsburgh. So again, I understand the roller coaster nature of it. The funny thing about it, you look at the 2 fan bases that are happy in the SEC today, Kentucky and Texas A&M. Texas A&M had a 5-game losing streak during the conference, just different time. Kentucky had a 4-game losing streak. People were talking about, are they going to be in the NIT? So some of it's just timing. You draw a couple of road games, you get knocked off at home, and all of a sudden you've got a losing streak. So plenty of areas for Alabama to improve in, but probably more positives than some people are willing to acknowledge.
We're talking with Cecil Hurt, the sports editor and columnist for the Tuscaloosa News, on a Monday edition of Southern Fried Sports presented by Carty and Lloyd, attorneys at law, and Mercedes-Benz of Tuscaloosa. Cecil, you hit on it with Kentucky and A&M, and we sort of just talked about this, I guess, with Alabama in terms of meeting expectations. The SEC, I think in the eyes of a lot of people, overachieved, historically overachieved in getting 8 teams into the NCAA tournament. The second round, obviously not as good to the league as the first 2 days were. But Texas A&M and Kentucky, I guess at the end of the day, again, going back to the preseason, those were the 2 teams that most people expected to be here going into the second weekend.
In the preseason, that's what you would have said. You know, just looking at the rosters, looking at the big guys that they've got. Big guys help. You know, they do. So probably the one you'd look at it a little differently if Tennessee if Loyola had knocked down that shot against Tennessee and Tennessee had won. Everybody else probably about what you'd expect. Like I say, Auburn had the highest seed and you know won the regular season championship, but they were shot at the end of the year. You know they were done. So I didn't expect to see them in the Sweet 16. Florida lost a close game to Texas Tech. Tennessee lost a close game to Loyola, and the rest of it I think was about as expected, except for the way that Texas A&M just crushed North Carolina. He just crushed them.
And A&M's talent truly showed up yesterday. I mean, you knew they had those kind of pieces going into the season, but it was on full display in that impressive performance against the Tar Heels. Looking ahead to next season, Cecil, the narrative of Alabama being better without Colin Sexton, I tried to put into context my thoughts on that topic in the opening segment. Do you expect Alabama to be better? And if so, why without Colin Sexton?
Well, sports are unique, Travis, and here's a couple of examples. Tennessee was better without Peyton Manning, right? And won the national championship the next year. Georgia was better without Dominique Wilkins, right? They went to the Final Four the next year after he went pro. So does that mean that Peyton Manning or Dominique Wilkins weren't great players and that Tennessee wouldn't have loved to have had him back or that Georgia wouldn't have loved to have had Dominique Wilkins back? Obviously, they would. Sometimes those things occur independently of how good a guy is. You know, and I think that would, if Alabama's better, it will be independent of saying how good or not good Colin was, because Colin was great. You know, he wasn't perfect, but you know, he that Texas A&M team we were just talking about, he single-handedly beat them in St. Louis. I mean, let's be honest about that. Teammates certainly contributed, but Alabama doesn't win that game without Colin Sexton. So they certainly could be better independently of how good Colin is. That's just the way it works sometimes. I think sometime when you're not rolling down I-20, maybe in the next, after you're rolling back with a Lady Buck championship trophy in your trunk, a great question for next year to debate and chew up. Just name the starting 5. Let's say that Akron rolls into Coleman Coliseum for that opener on November the 26th, or whoever the opening game will be. Who are the 5 guys who step on the floor for Alabama? It's a great question. I don't know.
Well, let me ask you right now: who would you have right now, Cecil, as your 5 for that game?
Probably Ingram, Petty, Herb Jones, Key, and Hall, and that's based entirely on experience. But if you told me no, it would be, you know, you'd have Tevin Mack in there. I could certainly see that.
Yeah.
You'd have You'd have
Texas transfer. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have some other combination. You'd have two bigs in there. You'd have
How about Galen
Smith who
Smith?
started down the stretch. Yeah, exactly. You'd have the freshman point guard from Louisiana, Jared Butler.
Yeah.
Don't know that, but am I going to say it's out of the realm of possibility? No. So it's an intriguing question. You would think that those guys. You would think that and again, we'll see how the roster works out. College players come and go far more frequently. People focus on their own team and say, "Oh my gosh, a guy transferred." Everybody has guys transfer
everywhere. Yep,
that just happens. That's just part of basketball.
We're at a point. We're at a point now, aren't we, Cecil, where you can figure on about 1.5 players a year. I mean, if you averaged it out, is it about 1.5, 2, maybe? That
it is
on average that are moving along.
It's about 40% over time.
Wow,
40 to 50% of the guys you sign are going to transfer. That's just the way it goes.
Amazing.
They're looking for playing time. They're looking for a place where they fit a little better. So that's understandable. There's some variables for Alabama. I don't know that Riley Norris has completely made his mind up. I think he'd like to keep playing basketball, but I'm not going to speak for him and his family. And that's a tough rehab on a hip injury. So we have to see what Riley's status will be. Braxton tested the waters last year, so if he decides to do that again, then he's gone. And he might or might not. And again, you might have somebody. There's a lot of bigs on the roster next year, and there might be one that somebody says, "Hey, you can come play for us," and not have to fight 4 other guys for a minute. Somebody at a mid-major say you'd be our centerpiece. So we'll see. Just see how that works out. But the guys that we just named, particularly Tevin Mack, nobody's seen him much. Nobody knows. But the one thing this is a guy that's a 15-point a game scorer at a high-level Power 5 conference. He's not coming in from Coastal Carolina with those numbers. He's coming in from Texas. So that tells you something. That tells you that he can replicate those numbers in the SEC. So that's an interesting variable because they're a team, without Sexton, they're going to need some offensive firepower. He can do it. So where he fits in, how much Herb improves in the offseason, how much John Petty improves, how much Galen Smith improves. We had a conversation about him developing his offensive game. He adds a head fake, gets his free throws up to 65%. He's an offensive. He's an offensive option down there all of a sudden. So it'll be fascinating. It really will.
Well, and I think all the options we just outlined are reasons why people will expect Alabama, even without Colin Sexton, to perhaps take another step. And the point on Tevin Mack, I don't think can be talked about enough. I'm with you. I think this guy can upon his eligibility after sitting out a year as a transfer, really inject some versatility too in terms of how he can score for this team. Maybe be more of what you thought Braxton Key was going to be like from that standpoint. And if Braxton gets back to where he needs to be, to have a couple of guys like that, that's reason for optimism, no doubt. Got to talk to you about some football, obviously.
Sure.
They're going to start football practice, as we know, in Tuscaloosa tomorrow afternoon. Gosh, obviously the quarterback situation is going to be far and away the most talked about aspect of this football team going into tomorrow's practice. But for you, in terms of maybe an area or two that we're not talking about enough, is it J.K. Scott? Is it Bradley Bozeman? As far as places, holes, the secondary, what is really the biggest concern or two for this team going into spring drills?
Concern. I don't know on concerns because you sort of have a default setting these days that they'll get it fixed. Alabama's got plenty of players and great coaching, and it'll be fine. But they got a whole defense to rebuild. The whole defense. I mean, they lost dynamic guys, or losing dynamic guys on defense. Deron Payne. Who do you plug and play there? Rashawn Evans, Minka Fitzpatrick, Ronnie Harrison. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of productivity and, a word we use a lot, alpha dog personality on a defense. Is there talent coming back? Absolutely. You saw the way Anthony Jennings played until he went out with the elbow injury. He'll be back. Don't know how much, to what extent in the spring, but, he can be that kind of player. Mack Wilson can be that kind of player. Interested to see Savion Smith in the secondary and see if he can be that kind of player. Because the secondary is just going to have to be almost from scratch, just about from there's some guys, obviously, Shane Carter and some guys who had some experience, but it's almost from scratch. And there's a nod of Deron Payne that I see on the roster. There's some talent on the defensive line, sure. Buggs, Raekwon Davis, big guys, big mobile, physical guys. But that to me is the story much more. I know people want to talk about Tua and Jalen and Tua until the cows come home. But they got a whole defense to rebuild.
Cecil, chances of us getting a pecking order question for Nick tomorrow in regards to the quarterback situation. Could we be so blessed, Cecil?
No,
I
mean, people have been talking about it the whole off season. There's not a lot of opportunities to talk to Nick after a championship game, other than at a signing day setting. So sure, people, and it's fair. It's fair. Now he may blow up or be terse with his answer, or he may want to talk about it.
He knows it's coming, though. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's coming, and that's no, whoever asks it's a valid question. It would be the same question if, in the same situation, if the beat writer at Colorado is going to have to ask the same thing if they have the same situation. It's just so much higher profile here because they're the defending national champions, and because of the way the season played out, and because people are so interested in it, so vested in it. But if there's one thing about Nick, he's never going to make that kind of call in the spring. He's just not. He just doesn't do that because he doesn't have to do it. You just don't have to declare a starting quarterback.
There's no motivation. There's no motivation whatsoever to make that call.
No, it doesn't. It decreases competition. It increases controversy. There's no plus on either side.